Stadiums. Couple of bit of stadium chat. Everybody loves a bit of stadium chat in Australia, and there's been a fair bit going on. It's all related to Aussie rules football in a way, but that also means it's related to cricket because these things are intertwined because they're played on the same ground because cricketers invented Australian rules football. For all the people who are like, oh, stop talking about football. Well, cricketers. Blame cricketers. It's their fault. They're responsible for a lot of things. So the info for the new Tasmanian AFL team was announced this week. They've went past 80,000 founding members out the gate, which is pretty extraordinary. This is relevant because the new stadium that's going to get built in Tasmania is also going to host high-level cricket, but that's if it actually gets built, which is not an entirely done deal. They've got a state election happening this weekend. The Tories, who are in power at state level in Tasmania at the moment, are the ones who negotiated that stadium deal with the AFL, with the Australian Football League. The Labor Party, who are contesting to win government on the weekend, say they want to renegotiate the deal. They're not very clear on what that actually means, but basically I don't know. There's a lot of money being spent, and so they kind of want to be able to say, we would like to spend less money in some way or get someone else to pay for more of it or whatever it might be. And meanwhile, in Queensland, a lot of stuff's been going back and forth about the Olympics and stadiums there. Maybe we'll start in Tasmania.
Yeah, so, well, look, put it this way. The Tassie side, that's been a brilliant launch, and I think it's up to 100,000 as of this evening, foundation members. It's an incredible story, right? And good on them for it. I think this is just terrific that the community have gotten behind it to such an extent. They're not getting the team unless they get the stadium built.
Yes.
The 18 club presidents who backed them in last year, with Gillon McLachlan at the AFL, sort of making sure that happened when he was on the way out the door. And again, credit to him for making sure that he got the presidents over the line. They will withdraw support for that team unless that stadium gets built. So it's all going to hinge on this. And it'll have to be to the specifications that have been outlined too. There'll be no sort of no frills version of it. The Macquarie Point, it's Macquarie Point, isn't it? Macquarie Point precinct, that stadium has to go ahead. And if it does, there's nothing more certain than international cricket moving there. So Bellerive, beautiful as it is, that will get overtaken. So state cricket will get played at Bellerive Oval, and anytime Australia play, it'll be at the new stadium with the roof, right? There's a roof there. They're talking about putting over the top of it. And anyway, so this is quite.
So it's one of the non-negotiables is that it's roofed. So the issue is that it has to be central. So Bellerive is on the other side of the Derwent, and which means it's more difficult to get to in terms of transport, and it's surrounded by residential housing. So the streets are narrow. There's no prospect of widening anything. There's not much prospect of adding extra public transport access because there's just no room to expand anything. So that's why they didn't aim to build it at Bellerive, where they have been playing footy and cricket for a long time. They want it on the other side of the river, next to the city, so it's easy to access by foot, and so they can build in all the transport infrastructure that they need for it.
Yeah, and it's going to be brilliant. Like I was in Tassie in December and had a walk around to where not quite to where the stadium is going to be because it's cordoned off. But broadly speaking, in that part of Tassie, it's going to be like a 5-minute walk to Salamanca, and it'll mean that you can stay in central Hobart and have that as part of your experience. It's going to be terrific. So no dramas there. The state election this weekend is timely because will give some certainty, I think, to all the various stakeholders. And I don't think there's any real chance of a change of government from what people are telling me in Melbourne. That's improbable. And I suppose the intervention of having the launch and the Devils logo and the foundation memberships and all the goodwill towards the Jack Jumpers as well, with them playing in the NBL finals this week, it does feel like there's a want for continuity around this. It's political inherently, and not everyone will share this view, I'm sure, whether money should be dumped into a new stadium instead of being dumped into hospitals and health and so on, but and education or other bread and butter state government topics. But remembering that the federal government have got a fair bit of money into this as well. So anyway, we'll learn more soon. But it's been a significant week on that front, and it's been an even bigger week in Queensland. I mean, this is really something. I mean, you could say that if you wanted to be churlish, you could say that this is why it should have been Melbourne or Sydney, right? This is why it should have been Melbourne or Sydney if they're having another pop at Olympic Games. And the knock-on effects are considerable, and they are definitely going to have an influence on cricket into the future, because the Gabba is nearly finished in terms of its current layout. The problem with the Gabba is you can't go any bigger due to the size. They absolutely tried to make it the Olympic Stadium originally, but it's not been seen as sustainable or viable due to how much money it was going to cost due to the small footprint that the Gabba's got, with residential streets around it, with Stanley Street and Vulture Street being right on with houses and all the rest of it. So that does mean that they've had to come up with a new way, and that will mean that the Gabba gets a lick of paint, but it doesn't get a rebuild, and that means that the Gabba's spot is in jeopardy, I reckon. What will Test cricket look like in Brisbane in 10 years' time? That's very unclear.
Well, look, it's what you've got is a couple of situations where it's the same in Tassie as it is in Brisbane, where as soon as you announce a headline figure of how much money it's going to cost, people get pissed off. Why are you spending that money on sporting infrastructure when you could be spending it on ABC through to Z, other things, without actually sort of having the understanding that it's not like your savings account where you've got X amount of money that you can apportion to this, and this, and that's it. You know, governments run on debt, they run on borrowing, they run on business cases that the expenditure on something will be repaid in time over the income that it's going to help drive, and all the rest of it. And yeah, there's a lot of bullshit in terms of that income, in terms of those income projections when it comes to sporting infrastructure. Yeah, have an Olympic Games and you'll make X billions of dollars. And of course, that doesn't actually happen. And so that's why nobody else wanted the 2032 Olympics. That's why Brisbane was the only city bidding for it, because cities were wise to the fact that the IOC come in, make a lot of money off them, suck as much money out of the place as they can, and then leave. You know, the IOC is sort of the ultimate predator capitalist body, really. So Brisbane went into this bid saying, well, we're not going to build a whole bunch of new stuff. We're going to use what we have. And the IOC said, fine. And then Brisbane said, okay, we're going to knock down the Gabba and rebuild it entirely, which is unpopular with aspects of the community. You've got the East Brisbane Primary School that lives just under the eaves of the Gabba there, that was going to be destroyed so that they could try to use that extra bit of footprint there. And so that was so unpopular that they commissioned this review to say, what should we do instead? And the review said, well, instead of doing that, why don't you build a new, more expensive stadium in Victoria Park, which is a big area of open parkland just near the city. So then you're losing 10+% of the open space of that parkland to put a stadium on it, which is going to cost hundreds of millions more than the Gabba redevelopment. So now the state government in Queensland have said, well, we're not going to do that either, and we're going to do this sort of halfway in between situation of making some improvements to Lang Park, which is the rugby stadium, the rectangular stadium, hold the athletics at the Queensland Sports and Athletic Centre, which is miles away. Like, it's on the far side of Mount Gravatt. It's like at the moment, with no traffic or problems, it's 40 minutes on the bus from the middle of town in Brisbane. There are no trains out there. The trains go to Sunnybank and Cooper's Plains, which are sort of vaguely kind of a few kilometres away, but there'd have to be massive transport investment to actually make that viable as a place to move people to for all the athletics events. So I don't know how they think they've solved the problem. Like you say, the Gabba's running out of time as a viable place to stage a high-level sport. It needs a major redevelopment anyway. So that's not going to happen. The Gabba's going to sit there as is. The new stadium probably is a bad idea, but it was an idea which has been rejected out of hand. Where does that leave them? It seems like it's a very unpopular position to be in, because whatever decision you make is going to be unpopular, and the state opposition are loving it. They're just sitting there going, oh, well, we don't back any of these proposals. We're just going to wait and see which one the government goes with so we can pick them apart over it.
Firstly, I want to say great local knowledge from our Brisbane correspondent, Jeff Lemon, who, of course, moved up to the Sunshine State during the pandemic. You're all over that with the minutes that were going to be required from Roma Street and so on the bus. But yeah, the QSAC, or listeners from overseas might remember that as the stadium for the 1982 Commonwealth Games, and that hasn't had the type of investment, so it's going to have to be rebuilt. It wasn't recommended by Graham Quirk in his independent review. That's the friction point here, right? They've recommended one thing, and the state government has said, actually, we don't want to do that. That also talked about demolishing the Gabba, but expensive, but that was one option, which was kind of the story on day one. And by the time the state government came out and said they were going to host the opening ceremony at at Lang Park. I mean, is Wally Lewis going to light the flame? I mean, that'd be great. It'd be funny. But yeah, obviously Lang Park is not suitable for track and field because it's a rectangular stadium. So they'll go the model of Paris. Where
just lean into it. Run the 400 metres with corners. Just it's been the curve is too easy. It's been too easy for too long. What do you do if it's got right angles? Then it's all about your cornering. Then you add a new aspect. I think this could spice things up. I think this is the way to go.
Well, what did they say with the 100? The fresh strategic element of the 10 ball over to finish. Well,
that's it.
This would be that, asking the best 100 metre runners in the world to do a handbrake turn as they're near
Tokyo
the final
drift
stretch. But yeah. And the reason this is all relevant is because if the Victoria Park Stadium did get up, and look, there's a state election this year in Queensland, and they've been in power, the government, since 2014. So they're a decent chance of being replaced anyway, just on general rhythm, right? Governments are really elected 4 times at state level. So they might, as you say, see this a different way. So they might end up paying for the Victoria Park Stadium, and that will mean the Gabba gets replaced, right? It's improbable, if I'm reading this correctly, they would do the demolition job at the Gabba and rebuild that and do Victoria Park. So
no. It's very much either or. So the Victoria Park proposal is what to do instead of doing the Gabba, because basically it was like, well, the Gabba's going to cost 2.7 million, so why don't we just do Victoria Park for 3.4? But that still leaves the Gabba sitting there as a legacy item that is redundant, that's obsolete, and that's falling further into disrepair. So it still leaves you with the problem of the Gabba needing something to be done with it, needing either to be brought up to standard or got rid of, which is still going to cost a huge amount to do. So I don't think the new stadium actually solves the problem. I think replacing the Gabba seems like the only thing that actually addresses the issue they've got, which is they don't have facilities up to the standard that they need at the moment.
And the replacement of the Gabba, not just the demolition, but remembering, I think the demolition's super expensive, even just to turn it into something else, was the original idea that was percolating or circulating before Christmas, which now everyone is against. So the price tag on that to turn that into the Olympic Stadium was so exorbitant that that's all been dealt with. So, I mean, a lot of infrastructure chat here, but yeah, it feels like the decisions that are being made now will have a long-term it will determine the long-term future of what international cricket looks like in both of those cities and both of those states. So we'll keep a watching brief on that. Speaking of administration and decisions behind the scenes, the ICC board met in Dubai last week. You wouldn't know it. There was no reporting. There was an ICC statement. Normally you see kind of like yarns from those that have come out and spoken to journalists, and look, if we were more on it, maybe we would have done that ourselves. So I don't want to cast aspersions about our colleagues or about the process of reporting on this. But there was a statement from the ICC which runs through a number of things that are of some interest to us. They said there was a lengthy conversation about the structure of bilateral cricket, which was, using their words, the top of the agenda. Also, windows for the other domestic T20 tournaments outside of the IPL. So this is in the middle of the zeitgeist, if you want, for cricket administrators at the moment. A quote here: principles of commercial relationships underpinning the FTP. I wonder whether that's a nod towards revenue sharing and TV rights pooling. It might be, it might not be. Greg Barclay, the chair of the ICC, was quoted as saying there are no easy answers, but said they will have further conversations around this in their next meeting later in the year, which I think from memory takes place in July. In practical terms, the shot clock for the for one-day cricket and T20 cricket that was trialled late last year is going to be a full-time thing for all series that's played. I can't remember the exact specifics on this, Jeff, but I think it limits.
It's just to start an over.
You've got at the end of the over.
You've got 1 minute to start the next over or whatever it is, but it doesn't apply to delays within the over, so it only goes so far.
Yeah. It did, they say, save 20 minutes on average for each ODI innings in the trial. That's a good thing. It'll be used in the T20 World Cup that will be in America and the Caribbean later this year. On that, by the way, they said there'll be reserve days for the semi-finals and the finals. So in the group stage of the T20 World Cup, it'll be the normal T20 thing where if you get 5 overs in, it'll constitute a game, if it rains or whatever else. But for the semi-finals, the final, and the Super 8 stage, it'll be elevated to 10 overs, and I suppose that's because they'll have a little bit extra a little bit of extra latitude there with the reserve days built in. And the last thing in this was that they've agreed to the qualification process for the T20 World Cup in 2026 in India and Sri Lanka. That's for the men again, and that seems like it's exactly the same as this one. 12 automatic qualifiers, including the hosts. Some of that's done on rankings, and then we go into the regional qualifier process, which will make up the last 8 spots in a 20-team tournament. So no major changes there. But yeah, sort of feels like, Jeff, if there's nothing else doing the rounds from a media perspective, it must have been a pretty boring meeting.
Yeah, or nobody was incentivized to leak anything, I suppose. But it's encouraging at least that if they're talking about the bilateral structure, which leads directly into the windows for T20s, trying to firm up time when international cricket can be played, and the FTP principles, I mean, that it could be a very double-edged sword. That could mean that we're getting a release in a year or so saying we're going to play international cricket for 4 weeks a year in between T20 leagues. But hopefully it means something else is happening, although the fact that they say this is all very complicated and we'll talk about it at future meetings is like, oh, great, okay, we'll just keep having discussions about it, and while the earth slips away from under our feet. Anyway, we'll have one more break, and then we've got a fair bit to get through with the WPL finals, the Sheffield Shield, and more.